Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Giants Healthy Innovators TV. We're launching a new program this year, which is all about initiating discussions with senior successful innovators in the UK health sector. And in particular, it's about selling to the NHS. I'm sure everybody has heard all of the anecdotal interpretations that the NHS is the third largest employer in the world and one of the largest buyers of stuff in the world. So whether the Chinese army is larger than the NHS or not, what we do want to focus on is the fact that the NHS is an extremely well-established healthcare provider across the UK and internationally. They spend many tens of billions of pounds every year buying products and services from a wide range of many tens of thousands of suppliers. And we're keen to help everybody who is involved in developing new products and healthcare innovation services to learn about this important topic, which is selling to the NHS. So thank you very much, Michael Watts, for joining us. Nice to see you. How have you been?
I'm good, thanks, Barry. And you?
Yeah, doing very well. Thank you.
Good. It's
So,
good to be back.
for all of our audience around the UK and around the world, I'm delighted to introduce you to our good friend Michael Watts. Michael, among other things, is Young Health Tech Leader of the Year in 2024. He's also co-founder and CEO of Blum Health. I'm sure I've mispronounced that. And Michael is also an NHS doctor and clinical informatician. So, Michael, you've had a lot of great successes already in your early career. So, congratulations on all of that. Very impressive
Thank you.
CV, and you're doing great work. And we're proud to have you collaborating with us on this call today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Barry.
And do remind me how to pronounce Blum Health.
Yeah, it's Blum. It's Blum.
Blum.
But yeah,
Okay.
You're not the first and won't be the last, so it's absolutely fine.
I promise to mispronounce it on an ongoing basis. No, forgive me
Thank
for
you
that.
very much for that.
So, Michael, we're keen to talk, like I said, quite narrowly and specifically about selling into the NHS. So, to begin with, the first question I have for you is the following. What was your biggest breakthrough moment in successfully selling to the NHS? How did it happen?
So I've studied selling to the NHS or introducing value into the NHS for many years. I actually did it as my MBA thesis, was how do we work with an organization as big and as complex as an NHS. And one of the biggest breakthroughs that I found works best is actually engaging the clinician. So obviously being a clinician, I thought this was going to work, and lo and behold it has. But one of the best things we found, one of the single biggest tips to being able to better engage with the NHS and introduce value, is by introducing a clinician stakeholder on their side of the table fairly early on. So what does that mean? So if you're selling a cancer solution, hardware, software, doesn't matter, actually getting the chief oncologist, the head of department, the clinical director for oncology involved, and getting them bought into your system from the outset is probably one of the best things you can do. Why? Because if you're speaking to finance directors and procurement, these people typically don't have a clinical background. They're more focused on finance and accounting,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
it becomes a really fair and nice imbalance when you've got one of their staff, colleagues, friends on your side of the table, because they're bought into what you're offering. They believe in the value for money. They believe on the impact that it's going to have. And they're saying, actually, Mr. or Mrs. procurement person, we really need this. It creates a more fair and balanced discussion around actually why this isn't just about money. It's about impact. It's about patience. It's about return on investment through all of those channels. So that's been one of the single best things we've done, is actually getting the clinician bought in and then going to
Nice.
speak to the finance teams.
Nice. No, Michael, this is excellent. This is such a good, if you will, bit of direction for people that want to accomplish this. Would you be able to share a story on that theme? Obviously, don't need to name names, but could you share a story about this opportunity that starts with engaging with the senior, most influential clinicians?
Yeah, and I can talk about how we made the mistake of going directly to procurement first. We went to a finance director to try and sell one of our preventative healthcare solutions. Now, the problem with prevention is that it's actually quite hard to demonstrate return on investment from the outset, right? Because
Sure.
you're speculating to accumulate, right? You're basically saying invest in this now, and in 12 months time we'll have saved you X, Y, and Z, but we can't demonstrate savings on day one. Anyway, So we took this solution. It's a lab management solution. It effectively helps organizations identify inappropriate testing across their lab solution across their
Okay.
labs. So basically, where are doctors, nurses making inappropriate tests, and how much is that costing the trust every year? So we took that to procurement. We was like, right, this is going to be a really easy ROI. But actually, it wasn't until the lab director said, we are inundated with requests, our analyzers are constantly full, we cannot keep up, our turnaround times are going up, there's more to this than finance, there's net zero, there is patient response times, there is getting these results back to the patients, and some of these are cancer and serious
Yes.
illness. So it was that conversation that tipped it over the line to say to the procurement team, well, there's a financial return on investment and a pretty decent one, but it wasn't enough for them to directly award that contract. But then that clinician managed to tip it over the line in terms of getting that contract over the line, and that happened. So again, would that have changed? Would the contracting life cycle been shorter if we'd have gone to the clinician first? I think so, but in hindsight, you just speak to whoever it is that you can contact first and foremost.
Nice. How did you actually initiate the contact with the what was it? Was it the head of the lab or something?
Yeah, it was the consultant pathologist or head of pathology. I mean, there's a number of ways now, right? We're really privileged to be able to have quite easy access to these people, right? The first is through conferences. I think I met this guy at a conference. It was specifically a lab conference.
Nice.
So I managed to engage the clinician through there. But also as well, a lot more clinicians nowadays, a lot of NHS doctors are usually on LinkedIn because they've got a portfolio career. So they're looking to build out, perhaps a side hustle in clinical safety or medical affairs or something like that. So they
Nice.
become a lot more accessible through LinkedIn because and
Yes.
other channels like that, because
Yeah.
they are usually doing their own thing as well as their NHS work. So by
Excellent.
default, that's just made them more available, and they're open. A lot of them are open to these conversations as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. No, this is extremely interesting. Thank you for sharing, Michael. This is a great case study and a great example. Often one hears of the phrase or the concept of an influencer as opposed to a decision maker. So in the scenario that you've been outlining here, regarding the actual sale, who were the decision makers, and was the head of the lab an influencer as opposed to a decision maker? And if you could elaborate a little bit about these themes of, engaging with influencers versus engaging with decision makers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I like the influencer decision maker analogy. I use a similar analogy of the consumer versus the customer. Healthcare is quite
Okay.
a unique one, right? Because the consumer is very rarely the customer. The customer, like you say, or the decision maker is usually finance, accounting, those divisions, whereas the consumer is usually staff or a patient. So
Okay.
it's not like, you go to the shops, you buy a banana, you're the person that eats the banana, you're the consumer and the customer. In healthcare, it's totally different because
Hmm.
there's usually a massive disconnect unless you sell a direct to consumer solution, in which case you may or may not be engaging with the NHS anyway. So when you're engaging with the NHS, chances are your consumer is going to be that clinician or their patients, and your customer is the procurement team. The trick is to get them aligned, because it's a rarity that they are not the same person, but now they're not the same person. You've got to get them on the same page, and it's no one else's job other than you as the supplier to be able to win them, both sides over, and get them to agree to why it's a valuable solution.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That's extremely interesting and very helpful. The second question you might have answered already, but would love to develop it further, and that is, what are common mistakes that companies make when trying to sell into the NHS? I suppose you have, in a way, answered this already by beginning to understand relationship between customer and consumer, or in other words, who are the decision makers when it comes to procurement? Who are the influencers? Do you want to develop that further, or do you have other examples of mistakes you think that companies will make when they are trying to sell into the NHS?
Yeah, so I have a few other mistakes that people often make. The first is the NHS will invest in people that invest in them, right? So it takes time to build trust with the NHS. You know, the NHS doesn't have the funding and availability of funding to be able to quickly sign contracts. You know, it takes time, and you have to
Yep.
invest in the NHS to be able to reap the rewards of that. They want to see goodwill, they want to see commitment, they want to see value for money, and they certainly want to see impact. And if you can't demonstrate all of those things, they're not going to work with you, and that's rightly so. So understanding that, not getting frustrated about the fact that they're not buying your solution. Ask yourself why they're not buying your solution. Chances are it's not them, it's you. You know, if they don't need your solution, you have to go back and look at your product, not them, because
Hmm.
ultimately, if they needed it and they had the funding for it, they would buy it. So that's the
Hmm.
first thing. I think often people can blame the NHS for not buying their solution. If they're not buying it, chances are it's because it's not right for them. So you have to look at yourself. The other problem that, and the other mistake that I see a lot of small businesses make, is that they put all of their eggs into an NHS basket and make the NHS their
Oh,
only customer.
okay.
Um, I would treat the NHS as one customer. And the 10% rule would say that you should never have more than 10% of your revenue coming from one customer, 10% of your suppliers coming from one supplier, and 10% of your skills coming from one employee. So, on that basis, you want to make the NHS only 10% of your revenue. If you can do that and still have a successful engagement with the NHS, you're doing really
Mm.
well, because that means you've diversified 90% of your overall income through other channels, maybe private hospitals, maybe international, maybe different sectors altogether, like defence and education and sport and all of these other sectors that healthcare touches. Um, so diversification and de-risking your organisation is important, because the NHS is a slow moving organisation. It's a
Sure.
massive organisation. So we have to de-risk by diversification and take our time in making sure that the NHS relationships are meaningful, well thought through. The product alignment is really clear, and if you can avoid those two mistakes, you'll have a great experience in engaging with the NHS. Can't guarantee that you're going to be able to sell your solution to them, but you can have a much better experience because your expectation is managed.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. No, that's extremely helpful, and I think it's probably quite easy to overlook that when a business is saying, right, what do we make? Well, we make a healthcare product. Well, who uses it? Well, NHS hospitals. Well, that's focused on just trying to sell to NHS hospitals.
And that's where the naivety comes into play, because healthcare doesn't just stop with the NHS, right? It's in schools, it's in local authorities, it's in charities. There are so many other places where you can still deliver value that impacts on the NHS without actually the NHS being the customer, right? And
Yeah.
that's the important thing, is that um, the NHS can still be a beneficiary and not have to sign the contract. And this is the important part that I think often gets overlooked, is that we have fantastic healthcare infrastructure far and beyond the NHS, and we can still, if you're keeping people out of hospital, you're keeping people well, that's still benefiting the NHS without being the NHS direct beneficiary. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the naivety of hyper focusing on the NHS and saying that is who I want to support, but to just focus all of your energy into trying to get that into NHS contracts
Yes.
is just setting you up to fail, because there's so many other great channels in the UK for being able to collaborate and do business.
Excellent. Yeah, no, agree with you completely in terms of broader strategy. Going back to the narrow strategy, though, when a business is involved in selling to the NHS, could you share with us examples of how to actually identify the decision makers and how do you reach out to them? I assume, there's no front door of the hospital with a little or, organic chart on the front door saying, this is the lady you speak to sell the product that you're trying to sell. Um, could you walk us through maybe some processes and procedures that you've experienced here?
Yeah, you're totally right, Barry. I mean, these people don't walk around conferences with a shopping list. That's definitely not the way that it works.
No,
Unfortunately,
no.
that would be a lot easier.
Maybe in the future
but
we could organize that.
that'd be good. We'll see that at
Yeah,
Giant this year.
yeah. Let me
Um,
make a
but
note.
but so the first thing is referral. Healthcare is a very who you know industry, and
Oh,
typically it's built on trust. So we see about we're quite lucky actually. About 60-70% of our new business comes through referrals. That is other NHS organisations telling other organisations, NHS organisations, about the experience they've had with us. That's really
Nice.
important. You know, if you're having to pump all of your marketing fund into SEO and Google ads and other ads, LinkedIn ads, you have to ask yourself, why are people not talking about my solution? You know, we expect 30 to 40% of revenue should come from referrals. And if it's less than that, you have to ask yourself, why are people not referring us to their friends and family in terms of the
Right.
NHS friends and family? So
Yeah, yeah,
there's that
yeah.
piece. If you have the perfect product, you never spend a penny on marketing. If you have perfect marketing, you never spend a penny on sales. That's typically how it works. So always look at the product. Are people loving the product? Are they talking about it? Are they referring you in? That's the first thing. The other channels that we look at is tenders and frameworks. There are loads of them. Perhaps you might argue there's more than you can keep up with. So looking at the frameworks, looking at the tenders is a really easy way to get exposure and make it easier for these NHS organisations to contract with you.
Hmm.
And then conferences are a great place as well. We went through a year or two of not having great exposure at conferences. For a while, I think NHS leaders actually weren't as present at conferences as SMEs and industry partners might like to be. But I've really
Yep.
seen that kind of change over the last year. I think there's a
Oh,
lot more
interesting.
NHS stakeholders getting involved and going to conferences. So being present, networking, speaking about the value that you're creating, inevitably people will hear that. So they're the main three ones: tenders and frameworks, conferences, and referral management. Big one with referrals is the health innovation networks as well. They're a great place to start having conversations about what you're trying to achieve, and they can
Yes.
refer you in. They can refer you in to their local hospitals that might have that need, and they're a great safe space to be able to have that initial engagement.
Excellent. Excellent. And they're evolving, aren't they? The HINs, the Health Innovation Networks. And so
Yeah,
that's a great tip. Going back to you said frameworks, and what was the other element of frameworks and some
tenders.
tenders? Tell
So
us about
yeah,
those,
generally.
please. Yeah.
So there are a bunch of different ways you can see tenders. If you go on the Gov website and just look at find a tender, you can literally sign up, make an account, it's free. You can put in some keywords. So for Blum, we typically put in digital health development software, perhaps some of our more specific solutions around labs, operational efficiency, direct patient support. And then we'll get triggered notifications to our emails every time a new tender comes up. And it's great because, you know, that is people saying we've got a need and we've got funding to be able to do it, but then it becomes a competitive process, right? So everyone else can also see that. So
Sure.
the opportunity is clearer, but the competition is higher because obviously it's on a public platform where everyone else can also see it. So chances are if they can see it, so too can your competitors.
Of
So so
course.
so so find a tender. There are some third-party services like Stottles where they actually have created like an intelligent marketplace for tenders and frameworks where you can actually see insights around that tender and perhaps the risk or opportunity of that tender aligned to your business. So there's
Okay.
cool platforms like that. I think there's loads more. So I've name checked Stottles, but I'm sure there are equally as good ones as well. And then direct involvement with trusts as well. So building relationships with hospitals. This is where it can get really time consuming and perhaps feel like you're not making the best use of your time. A lot of
Okay.
these organizations that win this business are already building relationships with hospitals in the background so that when a need does come out on a framework, you're already kind of one step ahead of the mark. You've already got a relationship with them. They already trust you because you might have worked with them before, or you might have done a small piece of work with them in the past. And that goes a long way because, like I say, healthcare is very much a relationships industry.
Exactly. Yes. No, that's fascinating. What's the difference between a tender and a framework? And could you elaborate a little bit more on the frameworks, please?
For sure. So the difference is a framework is something that you apply to go on when there's no work available, but there is a big either pot of money or a commitment of money or commitment of capability from an organization. So typically frameworks are run by the Crown Commissioning Service, which is the government, or in the NHS, a big one is the Shared Business Services, NHS SBS. So they will say, we want to collate all of the AI scribes, for example, in the market into a framework, and then NHS Trust can effectively look into that framework and go shopping for them. So all of that due diligence and that value assessment has been done at the front door, and then people
Nice.
can go shopping into it. A tender is slightly different, because a tender is basically saying we have a need and we're going out to the whole market, and then you come and ask for it as you want. So that due diligence is done in real time via a request for a proposal. And that proposal will assess both the technical capability, the pricing, and then other things like social value, which is how much more are you pumping back into the local communities. So that's the difference. You've kind of got a framework which is assessment up front, no guaranteed opportunity. Tender is guaranteed opportunity, assessment done at the back end of that.
Okay, no, that's super helpful. Thanks for the extra explanation there. So the next question I just wanted to ask you is a little more practical. Let's say you've got a new product or a service. What practical steps would a new supplier take at the very beginning when it comes to targeting the NHS? So, if you will, kind of a startup to be, excuse me, not a startup, a starting process to begin your approach to the NHS.
So the first thing is getting your regulatory compliance down. So that is the single biggest thing that a lot of small businesses overlook, is actually having that regulatory compliance at the front door. The NHS has become a lot more well versed on what does that mean and what requirements are there for your solution. So having that presented on a plate makes it much easier for NHS organisations to engage with you.
Okay.
The other things are market analysis. We don't do it that well as small businesses because it's time consuming, doesn't feel that sexy, but
It's
actually
hard.
understanding, yeah, it is, it can be hard. That is the other part, is that a lot of this stuff is behind closed doors, but actually understanding the addressable market. I always say there are a lot of organizations at the moment finding gaps in the market, but is there a market in the gap, especially around AI? There's big trust issues around a lot of AI at the moment. It's very exciting times ahead, but if we look today, there's still a lot of procurement restrictions around AI at the moment, and that will change for the better. But right now, it can be challenging. So understanding the gap in the market is a key one, and also understanding competition. There are a lot of other innovators, not just domestically but internationally, that are probably doing the same thing. So understanding
Sure.
where you match up against them is super important. And after all of that, if you think that you've not got a viable solution, then you have to ask yourself, what is the right thing to do? Do we pivot? Do we find a different angle? Do we go to a different, perhaps, healthcare provider that's not the NHS? Do we go to a different country?
Yes, yeah, that's interesting. Um, the market analysis and the competitor analysis is, I think, for smaller businesses, it can kind of feel like a nice to have, but how do you push that into the must have in terms of your time commitment is a big challenge, but very important. So good stuff, Michael. Thank you for tabulating that. Really helpful. Okay, look, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but this has been unbelievably helpful. One final question, if you can help. So the whole theme of this conversation is about selling to the NHS. We've learned a lot already from you, Michael. So really good specific information and guidance, as well as some great case studies. I love what you opened up with regarding the lab and the relationship between customer and consumer, or influencer and decision maker. Super helpful. The final question I want to ask is, how has your approach evolved over time? Do you feel like you're learning and you have an approach now which is different in the theme of how to begin selling into the NHS, or ongoing growing sales into the NHS? What's evolved, and if you were talking to the Michael from 2 years ago, what would you be advising?
I think the biggest piece of advice is that you'd be surprised how quickly a conversation can change within the NHS. I would never burn an NHS bridge. A lot of people can often get frustrated about the slowness, and rightly so. Small businesses have runways, and those runways are always feeling like they're getting closer and closer, but you never know when a conversation might change, because one day they might not need the solution, the next day NHS England or DHSC might turn around and say, we've got a budget for this, and we're going to be distributing it across the network. And that, lo and behold, that relationship that you had, that you broke down because you got frustrated, you've now lost that opportunity. So it's tiring, it's busy, but maintain those relationships throughout the lifespan of the organization, because you never know when they might turn around. Some of our best opportunities have come from those conversations that we never thought would go anywhere, and we just kept
Interesting.
We kept offering our support. We kept offering some free support, which again, you have to be really careful about doing, but it goes a long way. And lo and behold, eventually they came off. I think our longest sales cycle was 652 days from first conversation to contract. And there was times where we thought this is absolutely not going anywhere, and it did. So that being persistently patient, we call it, is really important.
Brilliant. Absolutely superb. I want to put a little break right here just to help Robert with editing. I'm so sorry, Michael, I forgot. There's actually one more question.
That's all right.
We'll insert that higher up in the video before and this is the final question.
Not a problem.
So Michael, another question is about people working in procurement in the NHS. Tell us a little bit about them, and what can the business, the sellers, be doing to help the buyers? If you think about the profession of working in procurement in the NHS, how best can they be served and supported?
So I think for a lot of the procurement teams, they're typically, like I say, from a financial background, maybe a legal background, sometimes a clinical background. So they're going to have a mixed skill set of capability. And so what the single biggest thing you can do as a organization is make it really easy for them to understand what it is that you're offering. So again, having a compelling business case, having really clear return on investments, aligning it to the trust objectives, which, if you've done your homework, you should already know what they are, and then also supporting them through the contracting process as well. So having being able to complete the business case on their behalf, being able to contribute those values and statistics and the data that they need to be able to get it signed over the line. The more you can make that painless, the easier it is going to be to have that relationship with them. So they're
nice.
all. I've never not come across a reasonable procurement team. They do want to make change, they need to save money, and they need to deliver care. So your goals are aligned, but it's about making it as easy as possible to have those conversations by serving up the right data and the right information for them to clearly see the value and for value for money.
Exactly. Yeah, that's super helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, so look, Michael, we'll wrap up now. Thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to engage with you, and we benefit massively from your expertise, your experience, your passion. Obviously, we're very keen to do whatever we can to support and ensure the ongoing growth and success of you and your career and Blum Health. So good luck with all of that. Very keen to keep in touch with you. And once again, thank you so much for the valuable insights you shared with us today. These have been very interesting and informative, quite practical. So great stuff. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks again, Barry, for the opportunity, and everyone at Giant.
Excellent. Okay, Purya, how'd that go? Everything